Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into the fascinating mechanics of global wind systems. We're going to explore how these immense atmospheric patterns impact our daily lives, and then we'll unpack what our source material, a rather unique educational curriculum, suggests about the ordered design and philosophical meaning behind our world.
Here's a quick look at our agenda today. 1. The invisible force. 2. Heating and spinning Earth. 3. The 3 wind cells. 4. Winds in the real world. And 5. Divine order and wisdom. Let's get right to it.
To get things started, think about the weather for a second. Have you ever stopped to wonder why a storm system in the United States almost always travels from the west to the east? It feels like just a simple fact of life, but it's actually the result of a massive, incredibly powerful global engine constantly churning above our heads. It's an engine that dictates nearly every aspect of our global climate.
Now, interestingly enough, long before modern meteorologists had satellite imaging and advanced weather models, ancient wisdom actually framed this science pretty accurately. Our source text points to a quote from Ecclesiastes, highlighting that early observers realized the wind isn't just random chaos. Instead, it operates in a predictable, ever-returning cycle that follows specific, highly ordered paths around the globe.
Section 1. The invisible force, global patterns in our atmosphere.
You see, wind is so much more than just a passing breeze on a hot summer day. Understanding these massive global wind belts is the absolute foundation of how scientists predict severe storms, how airlines plot those safe, efficient flight routes, and even how oceanographers track deep ocean currents. It's the dominant player in Earth's interconnected weather system, literally creating rivers of air that constantly reshape the surface of our planet.
And there are specific patterns to all this movement. We're mainly talking about 3 major global wind belts: the trade winds, the westerlies, and the polar easterlies. Together, these 3 distinct belts blanket the Earth and dictate exactly how weather systems travel across the map. Truly, understanding how these 3 belts interact is the key to understanding our climate as a whole.
Moving to Section 2. Heating and spinning Earth, the engines of the wind. So what's actually driving all this? Well, it really comes down to 2 primary forces: the sun and the spin of the Earth itself. Because the Earth is a sphere, the air near the equator gets hit by the sun's rays dead on, while the poles receive much more scattered, less intense heat. This creates a dramatic temperature gap. And when you combine that drastic temperature difference with the constant dizzying rotation of the Earth, it creates a continuous dynamic planetary wind circulation. It's basically a giant heat distribution system, constantly trying to balance out the globe's temperature.
Scientists call this basic mechanical loop a convection cell. Here's exactly how it works in 3 steps. First, that direct solar sheet causes warm air at the equator to rise. But, that rising air has to go somewhere, right? So it travels higher up in the atmosphere, moving toward the poles. As it moves away from the hot equator, it cools down. Finally, that much cooler, denser air sinks back down to the surface, creating a continuous loop of rising, traveling, cooling, and sinking. This loop is the very heartbeat of our atmospheric engine.
Section 3. The 3 wind cells: Hadley, Ferrel, and Polar.
Let's break down where these 3 convection cells actually operate. The Hadley cell spans from the equator up to 30 degrees latitude, and that creates the trade winds. The Ferrel cell picks up from 30 degrees to 60 degrees, which gives us the westerlies. And finally, the Polar cell covers 60 to 90 degrees, generating the polar easterlies. Think of these cells like giant atmospheric gears, interlocking and turning together to drive the world's weather.
Now, the absolutely crucial thing to understand here is how a cell creates surface wind. Inside the Hadley cell, when that cooled air sinks at around 30 degrees latitude, it physically presses down on the Earth, creating an intense high-pressure zone. That pressure has to escape, so it forces surface winds back toward the equator. But because the Earth is rotating, these winds get deflected, a phenomenon known as the Coriolis effect. This deflection is exactly why the trade winds blow so reliably from east to west, rather than just straight north or south.
Which brings us to Section 4. Winds in the real world, how this impacts us.
These invisible belts literally shaped human history and global trade. Long before we had steamships, 17th century sailors were entirely at the mercy of the wind. They learned pretty quickly that the steady, predictable push of the east-to-west trade winds, generated by that Hadley cell we just talked about, was the ultimate key to safely crossing the Atlantic Ocean from Europe to the Americas. Without these specific global wind patterns, the entire era of global exploration would have looked completely different.
And it's not just the oceans. Have you ever noticed where the world's massive deserts are located? Huge, arid landscapes like the Sahara Desert sit right around 30 degrees latitude. This is directly due to that high-pressure, sinking dry air from the Hadley cell pushing moisture away, leaving the land incredibly dry beneath it. The wind is literally determining where life can thrive and where it faces extreme conditions.
And hey, this brings us right back to answering our very first question. The reason most storms in the United States travel from west to east is because the U.S. sits right in the mid-latitudes, between 30 and 60 degrees. This entire region is dominated by the Ferrel cell and its powerful surface winds, the westerlies. So the next time a weather front rolls in from the west coast, you'll know exactly which global gear is turning to push it your way.
Now think about how interconnected all of this is. The very same global trade winds that sweep across North Africa pick up dry, dusty sand from the Sahara Desert and carry it far, far out over the Atlantic Ocean. That layer of dry, dusty air can actually suppress storm formation, directly altering the development and trajectory of powerful hurricanes. What happens in a desert on one side of the world can make or break severe weather on an entirely different continent. It's a breathtaking butterfly effect.
Finally, Section 5, Divine Order and Wisdom, the Ultimate Design. So let's zoom all the way out. Our source material today transitions from the hard science to a philosophical framework. It presents the idea that God's world is full of order, viewing these perfectly designed wind belts as a physical metaphor. The text uses wind, an invisible, powerful force we can clearly feel acting upon the world, as an illustration of a divine presence acting upon our lives. The curriculum, specifically the heroesmartacademy Godly Learners series, poses a really interesting foundational question to its readers here. It asks, what is the point of being highly educated and understanding exactly how the physical world works if you lack the moral compass to avoid choices that end up hurting yourself and others?
According to the source, intertwining your education with biblical morality is presented as the path to true wisdom. To illustrate this point, the text points to Romans 8:6-7, arguing that education without a moral foundation ultimately leads to harm, whereas a mind governed by spiritual principles will experience genuine, lasting peace.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this. The next time you feel the wind against your face or watch the clouds racing across the sky, remember those massive, invisible global engines at work, and perhaps ponder the source's final challenge. How will you balance your own knowledge of the world with your personal moral compass to make choices that bring peace to your life and to those around you?